Logical fallacies can tank the persuasiveness of our speeches, and the best speakers work to avoid them. One easy way to prevent the use of logical fallacies is to learn to recognize them. That's why in this video we're going to talk about 10 different common logical fallacies. Number 10, the straw person fallacy. The straw person fallacy occurs when someone misrepresents or exaggerates someone else's argument to make it easier to refute. For example, let's say someone said, I think it would be okay if we raised taxes a little bit in order to fix the roads around here. And someone else replies by saying, I can't believe you'd think that. Why do you want to triple our taxes? That exaggeration going from a bit to triple is an example of this logical fallacy because it's exaggerating and misrepresenting the original argument. Why isn't this logical fallacy persuasive? Well, audience members might actually know the original argument being made and realize that you are exaggerating what is happening. And so either that audience is going to think, well, this person doesn't actually understand what is happening with this issue, or they'll think that you're unethical because you want to misrepresent or you did misrepresent what the other person said. Both of those things can really hurt our ethos. Number 9 is the ad hom attack. Ad hominem is when someone attacks the opponent instead of responding to their argument. So for example, in that last scenario where someone advocated for just a little bit of a tax increase to fix the roads, if someone came back and called them stupid, unintelligent, said they didn't know what they were talking about, that is attacking the person as opposed to responding to the argument about whether more tax revenue would help the roads. And that is an ineffective strategy because first, it makes you look really defensive. You don't really look like you know what you're talking about or you don't know the merits of the issue. You only can resort to attacking people as opposed to explaining why your position is correct on that issue. Number 8 is the bandwagon fallacy. The bandwagon fallacy is when someone assumes that just because a lot of people believe in one thing, it must be true. And so it substitutes popularity of an idea for actual evidence to support the idea. So this is the classic, would you jump off a bridge if your friend did? Or would you jump off a cliff if your friend did? Like, just because other people are doing it doesn't mean you should do it without thinking about the consequences of the action, what evidence there is to suggest which thing you should do. So an example of this is when people use polling data to support a policy. So if someone said, we should do this thing because 60% of Americans support it, technically that is basing the quality of the idea on popularity. So without other evidence to suggest why we should believe that policy, it could just be that those other 40% of Americans are actually the ones that are correct on this issue. The red herring fallacy. The red herring fallacy occurs when someone introduces irrelevant information or topics into a discussion that distracts from the actual topic or debate being had. And so let's imagine, for example, that there is a city council meeting where people are talking about what they can do to address the homelessness situation in that city. If you came and talked about your ideas about how to address climate change, you would not look like you're fitting in with the situation. You would not be responding to the actual conversation being had. You might distract from that conversation successfully and get people to start talking about climate change, but you haven't actually convinced people about your ideas about homelessness. And so a lot of times the red herring fallacy can undermine our ethos because it just looks like we don't know what is occurring. Sometimes the red herring fallacy is a little harder to recognize than that though, right? It's just you move into a different idea or different topic that kind of seems related without connecting it back to the original topic. So be on the lookout for that. Number 6, the hasty generalization fallacy. This fallacy occurs when someone tries to make a general conclusion with insufficient examples to really support that conclusion. So an example of that might be, let's say someone just had 2 Granny Smith apples. Now, Granny Smith apples are the green ones. They're kind of sour to the taste. Now, if someone had those 2 apples and concluded that all apples are sour, they would be wrong, right? There are other types of apples besides Granny Smith apples. Some are sweeter, some are more sour, some are tart. The issue here is that that person went to a general conclusion about all apples based off just 2 examples. And that is the hasty generalization, only using a small number of examples to make a broader conclusion. Number 5, the either-or fallacy. The either-or fallacy occurs when someone presents two competing positions as being the only possible positions in a particular situation. And usually there are other positions. And so this actually happens a lot in politics, especially in the United States, because we have two parties. So a lot of times it's really easy to look and say there's the Republican side and there's the Democratic side to this issue. But a lot of issues are much more complex than that. And so if you actually did the research on those issues, you could find that there are many different positions available to you other than just the talking points from one of the two parties. So an example of this actually happens sometimes in the gun control debate. In gun control debates, there is usually one side, the Democratic side, that is saying something to the effect of, we need to expand background checks in order to address this issue. And then there are other folks who say something to the effect of, well, you know that only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun, and so we should expand the places that people can bring their concealed carry weapon to. Now, a good thing to ask yourself if you think a logical fallacy or the either-or fallacy is happening is to say, can both be true? And in this case, both could be true. You could have universal background checks or expanded background checks and also expand the number of places that somebody could bring a concealed carry weapon to. So in that case, we have now established that there's three different options: combining the two, just doing one, or just doing the other. And I'm sure if you do research about gun control, you'll find a whole host of different options, ideas, policies that people have proposed in order to address things like gun violence. Number 4, the false cause fallacy. The false cause fallacy happens when someone assumes there is a relationship between two things, that one of those things must be causing the other to happen. And so this is usually talked about in terms of confusing or conflating correlation with causation. And I think an example will be helpful here. Think of the following statement: the sun rising causes people to drink coffee. Now, hopefully you know that that is not true. The sun coming up in the morning does not cause people to go drink coffee. However, most people do drink coffee in the morning, and that is when the sun comes up. So there is a relationship between the sun coming up and people drinking coffee, but the sun doesn't cause the people to drink the coffee, right? We know that some people don't drink coffee, some people drink coffee later in the day, and the sun is not causing it to happen. And so to avoid this fallacy, you really need to think, am I associating these things together just because they kind of naturally fit? Or do I actually have evidence to suggest that the one thing is causing the other thing to happen? The third fallacy is the slippery slope fallacy, and this one is kind of related to the previous one, false cause. The slippery slope fallacy happens when someone assumes that one small thing, one small change, if that one small thing happens, then a lot of other small negative actions or events are going to happen until we eventually get to a really large problem. Now, as you think about this fallacy, think about dominoes. When you hit the first domino, it falls over, hits the second, hits the third, hits the fourth, and so on. And so that is an example of the slippery slope fallacy, just kind of assuming that there'll be this cascade of small events leading to a big one if you push that first one, or do that first one, push that first domino. Number 2, the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Now, this fallacy occurs when someone selectively picks data to support their conclusion and doesn't really consider the rest of the data. And so I wanted to bring this up because sometimes logical fallacies happen when we are not keeping track of the evidence or we're misusing the data in some shape, way, or form. With big issues, think climate change, right? Really large issues that have a lot of data out there. It can be really hard to sift through the data, understand the data. And people could easily just do a quick Google search and find things that say what they already believe, and just use that data to support their position. And so what ends up happening is that they have very selective data that already agree with them, and they're not considering the totality of the discussion happening underneath that issue. And so one of the things I like to suggest is when you are doing the research, that's when you can best avoid the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, by making sure you are researching broadly and reading the articles or the evidence that people who disagree with you use, so that you then can respond to that position or those pieces of data in your speech as well. Number 1, the fallacy. This is my favorite fallacy, and the fallacy is when someone concludes that they are right because someone else used a logical fallacy. And so this, kind of more broadly speaking, is about judging the quality of the argument based off the quality of the speaker. And so just because a speaker isn't very good at explaining their argument, or they've made argumentative mistakes, does not mean that they are wrong. And watching someone else make mistakes does not mean you are correct. And there you have it. 10 logical fallacies that if you know about them, you can avoid them and become a more persuasive advocate. As always, if you want to learn more about public speaking, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching.